He didn't expect me to come out of the shower. He would enter. The door had no lock, and with that icy voice, he'd speak the words that haunt me to this day: "I won't stop until you're pregnant." For years, the hot shower water would freeze on my skin when I heard those footsteps in the hallway. Good afternoon, my dears. What a blessing to talk with you today. I'm Genevieve Rodriguez, 73 years old, born in Riverside, but today I live here in San Diego, California, close to the ocean. Many people call me Mrs. Jeannie, but my grandchildren call me Grandma Jeannie, and you can call me that too. I woke up early today, as I always do. Some say old folks don't sleep well, but I say we just make better use of the day, don't you think? I prepared my coffee nice and strong, the way we Americans really like it. Then I made some breakfast for my Everett, my companion for many decades. A good man, thank the Lord. While I do my needlework, I look out the window at the San Diego sky. Sometimes when the weather's clear, you can see a bit of the ocean in the distance. Water always reminds me of so many things. Not all good, I must confess. Water can seem peaceful on the surface, but nobody knows what runs in the depths, isn't that right? Before I continue, I'd like to kindly ask you to leave your like and subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel. It's just a small gesture, but it helps this old lady continue sharing her stories. And tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today I'm going to tell you a difficult story, one of those kept deep in the heart for many years. It's about how shower water can turn cold even when it's hot, about fears a girl shouldn't know, and about how, sometimes, we need to take justice into our own hands when no one else is looking. It's a story about surviving when there seems to be no way out. But to understand how I got here, I need to go back in time, to when I was just a girl in Riverside, full of dreams and unaware of the shadows that would come. I was born in 1952 in Riverside, in a simple house in the East Side neighborhood. It was a different time, my dears. The streets weren't all paved yet, and when it rained, the mud seemed endless. Our house was close to the railroad tracks. I remember the noise when the train passed by. Everything shook. Cups danced in the cabinet. My mother, Dorothy, always ran to hold the plates. We were a simple family. My father, Arnold, worked for the railroad. A quiet man, few words, but with huge calloused hands from heavy work. He left before sunrise and returned when it was already dark. My mother took care of the house and did laundry for others. I helped her from a young age, carrying buckets, ironing the simpler clothes. Her hands were red and cracked from the harsh soap, but I never heard her complain. We had a modest life, but didn't suffer severe hardships. My mother could work miracles with little. A potato became a complete meal, a small piece of meat stretched to feed everyone. At our dark wooden table, we gathered for dinner, me, my parents, and my brother Claude, 2 years older than me. Claude was my protector. When other children teased me at school because of my red hair, something rare back then that earned me the nickname Carrot Top, he was the one who defended me. "Mess with my sister, you mess with me," he would say, puffing out his skinny chest. Later, on the way home, we'd laugh as we kicked pebbles down the street. The school was a 20-minute walk away. We went on foot with our notebooks tied with string. Teacher Mrs. Wilson, a thin woman with gray hair, always in a tight bun, had a ruler she'd smack on the desk when the class talked. "Genevieve, read the next paragraph," she would order, and I'd tremble, the letters dancing before my eyes. I liked studying, but was too shy to speak loudly. Our childhood was simple, full of games that nobody knows anymore. We played jacks with small stones, hopscotch drawn on the ground, hide and seek between the clotheslines. In summer, when the heat was intense, my mother would fill a large basin in the yard, and we'd cool off, splashing water everywhere. She pretended to scold us, but then joined in, wetting her feet, laughing like a girl. Bath time back then was an event. We didn't have an electric water heater. Water was heated on the wood stove and poured into a metal tub. My father bathed first, then my brother, then me, and finally my mother. We saved water that way. In the harsh California winter, that hot bath was a blessing. My mother scrubbed my back with a rough cloth, humming old songs. Life went on like that, predictable and safe, until I was 9, when everything began to change. My mother started coughing. At first, it was just a dry cough she disguised by covering her mouth with her apron. Then, the cough got worse, sometimes accompanied by a handkerchief stained red that she quickly hid when she saw me looking. In the winter of 1962, when I was 10, my mother's cough got much worse. The doctor came to our house one night. I remember him entering with his black bag, the strong smell of medicine in the air. That night, I heard my father crying in the bedroom, the first and only time I saw that strong man shed tears. My mother had tuberculosis. At that time, it was almost a death sentence. They tried to admit her to the sanatorium in the mountains, but it was already too late. She wasted away quickly, like a candle extinguished by a strong blow. In 3 months, she was gone. I remember the simple coffin, the wildflowers we gathered for her, my father's restrained crying, my brother's trembling hands holding mine. Mourning covered our house like a heavy blanket. My father withdrew even more. He began drinking on weekends, sitting for hours in the kitchen chair, staring at nothing. Claude and I took on many household tasks. I, at just 10 years old, was already cooking, washing, cleaning. My small hands tried to imitate my mother's gestures, but nothing seemed right without her. 6 months after my mother's death, my father came home with company. A tall, thin woman with black, straight hair entered our kitchen. Her name was Gladys. She had a cold, calculating look. "Children, this is Gladys. She's going to take care of you in the house now," my father announced, without looking directly at us. It wasn't a request for permission. It was a statement. Gladys wasn't a bad woman, not completely. She kept the house in order, cooked well, but there was no warmth in her actions. Her hands never stroked our heads, her voice never hummed while she worked. She was efficient like a machine. 3 months later, they got married in a quick ceremony at the courthouse. And soon after, the news came. My father would be transferred to work in another city. Claude, who was already 14, would stay in Riverside at an uncle's house to finish his studies. I, however, would have to go with them. I cried, hugging my brother goodbye, promising we would write letters every week. That's how, at age 11, I left Riverside with my father and his new wife. Our destination, Barstow, where my father would work on the railroad expansion. It was 1963, and I didn't know that this move would be just the beginning of a much darker path than I could imagine. Away from my brother, from the house where I grew up, from the friends I knew, I was alone with 2 adults who seemed increasingly distant from me. The arrival in Barstow was like entering a strange world. The city was larger than Riverside, with the Mojave River cutting through it, imposing and mysterious. Our new house was on a street with irregular cobblestones, not far from the station. It was an old building, with high windows and floorboards that creaked with every step. It had a large backyard with an old fig tree that seemed to observe everything with its twisted branches. The first night, lying in bed in a room that wasn't mine, I cried softly, hugging the pillow. I missed Claude, our little house in Riverside, even the train noise that used to wake me. Here, the silence was heavy. The first weeks were for adaptation. My father left early for work and returned late, always tired. Gladys kept the house in order, enrolled me in the new school, took care of meals. She wasn't affectionate, but she wasn't cruel either. She was just absent, even when present. The school was 10 blocks away. I went alone, walking hurriedly among children I didn't know. In the classroom, I sat in the back, trying to go unnoticed. My Riverside accent, slightly different, made some classmates laugh. But gradually I made some friends. Susan and Teresa, 2 girls my age who welcomed me during recess. The months passed. I wrote to Claude every week, telling about school, new friends, the city. He responded less frequently. His letters were short, but always ended with, "I miss you, little sis." Those words were like a hug across the distance. At home, things began to change subtly. My father drank more and more, not just on weekends now, but almost every night. He arrived stumbling, his voice louder, his eyes red. Gladys received him in silence, helped him to bed. I pretended to sleep, listening to muffled voices, heavy steps in the hallway. One day, shortly after my 12th birthday, my father didn't come home. Gladys was nervous, pacing back and forth. When night fell, there was a knock at the door. It was a colleague of my father's, a man in railroad uniform, hat in hand. He spoke softly with Gladys. I watched from my bedroom door, my heart beating fast. There had been an accident. A train car derailed. My father was checking the tracks. He had no chance. Died on the spot, they said. I remember Gladys sitting in the kitchen chair, staring at nothing without tears. I cried for both of us, for my father who would never return, for my brother who was now even more distant, for my mother who was no longer there to console me. The funeral was quick, few present. They tried to locate Claude, but my uncle's address had changed. We sent a letter, but didn't know if it would arrive in time. It didn't. We returned home, Gladys and I, 2 strangers united in mourning. It was that night I realized something had fundamentally changed. Gladys was sitting in the living room when a man arrived, tall, stocky, with a thick mustache and small, hard eyes. "This is Amos," she said dryly. "My brother. He's going to stay with us for a while." Amos had large, rough hands and a strong smell of cigarettes that permeated the air around him. His gaze traveled over me in a way that made me want to hide. When he smiled, his yellowed teeth appeared behind his mustache, but the smile never reached his eyes. "What a pretty girl," he said that first night, extending his hand to touch my hair. I instinctively retreated. Gladys observed the scene without expression. In the following days, I discovered that Amos wasn't just passing through. He brought suitcases, many suitcases. He settled into what had been my father's room as if he had always belonged there. At night, I heard him talking with Gladys in the kitchen, voices low, conspiratorial. "The insurance will pay well," I heard him say one night, "but it's not enough. Need to think about the future, Gladys." 2 weeks after the funeral, Gladys called me to talk. She sat across from me with an expression that tried to be gentle but seemed like a poorly adjusted mask. "Genevieve, things are going to change a little," she began, her hands restless on the table. "Your father, he didn't leave much. The insurance money barely covers the debts he had. I can't maintain this house alone." I looked at her without completely understanding. "Amos has a small business in Needles, a trucking company. He offered to take us. We're going to live there. He's going to take care of us." Needles, another city. Even further from Riverside, from Claude, from everything I knew. I wanted to protest, wanted to scream no, that I wanted to return to my brother, but the words got stuck in my throat. I was 12 years old. I had no choice. We left 2 weeks later. I left Susan the address where we were going, asking her to write to Claude if he looked for me. I put in a small bundle the few mementos I had, a faded photo of my mother, an embroidered handkerchief she had made, some letters from Claude. Needles was an even smaller city than Barstow, located in the eastern part of the state. The house we went to was dark, with narrow corridors and cold floors. It was behind a large shed where Amos kept his 2 trucks. The smell of diesel oil and grease permeated everything. It was in that house that I began to understand the true meaning of fear. Amos wasn't just Gladys's brother. Soon after the move, they announced they were getting married. "It's more practical this way," Gladys explained without emotion in her voice. "He will be your stepfather now." Gladys changed after we arrived in Needles. She became more quiet, more submissive. She obeyed Amos in everything, never questioned his orders. He, on the other hand, became the absolute lord of that small dark kingdom. His voice echoed off the walls, his heavy boots announced his arrival, his unstable mood determined how the day would be. In the first months, Amos maintained a certain distance from me. He observed me during meals with those small, cold eyes, made comments about how I was growing fast. When he passed me in the narrow hallway, his hands occasionally touched my shoulders, my hair, in a gesture that seemed casual but left a trail of discomfort. I started attending the local school, but didn't make friends. I kept quiet, invisible. I returned straight home, helped Gladys in the kitchen, did my homework in a corner of the table. At night, I locked myself in the small room assigned to me, pushing a chair against the door, which had no lock. The definitive change happened after my mother's death, when I went to live with my stepfather Amos and his sister Gladys. 2 weeks after we arrived at the house in Needles, Gladys got sick. A high fever that wouldn't break, a dry cough that painfully reminded me of my mother. The doctor was called, prescribed medicine, rest. During Gladys's illness, I was the one who took on the household chores. I cooked as best I could, cleaned, washed Amos's heavy clothes that came back stained with grease and dust from the roads. He observed my efforts with a half smile on his face, commenting sometimes, "You're becoming a real little woman, huh?" One night, while I was washing the dinner dishes, Amos entered the kitchen. He was shirtless, wearing only old pajama pants. His broad chest was covered with grizzled hair. His protruding belly hung over the waistband. He stopped behind me, so close that I could smell him, a mixture of sweat, cigarettes, and something that only later I understood was whiskey. "You're doing a good job, Genevieve," he said, his voice slurred. "Your stepmother is sick, but you're taking good care of the house." I mumbled a thank you, eyes fixed on the dishes, hands trembling slightly in the soapy water. "You know, a woman needs to know how to take care of a house," he continued, getting even closer. "But she also needs to know how to take care of her man." His large, rough hands rested on my shoulders. I froze. He brought his face close to my ear, his hot, heavy breath against my skin. "When you're done here, go take your bath. I left a clean towel for you." That was the first time I noticed the bathroom door had no lock. It was a small, dark bathroom with a metal tub where we heated water for bathing. As the water heated on the stove, my heart raced. Something was wrong, something in the air, in Amos's words, in the way he looked at me. I filled the tub with hot water and a little cold, trying to prolong the process as much as possible. I got into the water, trying to relax, trying to push away the feeling of danger growing inside me. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. My heart stopped when the bathroom door opened. Amos was standing there, occupying the entire doorway, his small eyes fixed on me. I shrank in the bathtub, trying to cover myself with my arms, with the scant soap foam. "No need to be shy," he said, his voice different now, lower, more sinister. "We're family, aren't we?" I closed my eyes tight, praying he'd go away, that Gladys would call for him, that anything would happen. But nothing happened. He stood there, watching me in the increasingly cold water. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke the words that would mark the beginning of my nightmare. "I won't stop until you're pregnant." It wasn't a wish. It wasn't a casual threat. It was a sentence, a plan, a terrible promise that made the hot bathwater seem to freeze around my body. That night, I cried silently in my room, the chair firmly pressed against the door. But I knew it was just a symbolic barrier. If he wanted to enter, he would. I began to understand that I was trapped in a snare with no apparent exit. Far from my brother, without money, not knowing anyone in the city, completely at the mercy of a man whose eyes revealed intentions that a 12-year-old girl was beginning to comprehend with growing terror. The next morning, Gladys was still in bed, the fever still high. Amos left early with one of the trucks, said he'd be back in 2 days. Those were 2 days of respite, of desperate planning. I thought about running away, but where to? How? Without money, without knowing the roads, with nowhere to go? I wrote a letter to Claude, addressing it to our uncle's house in Riverside, knowing it probably would never arrive. In it, I told everything, begged for help. I went to the town post office, used the few coins I had saved to buy the stamp. It was a desperate cry for help cast to the wind. When Amos returned, he brought gifts. A dress for me, light pink, with small flowers, a size smaller than I wore. "You'll look pretty in it," he said, his gaze traveling over my body in a way that made me feel dirty. For Gladys, he brought cough syrup. "You'll get better soon," he said, but there was something in his tone suggesting he didn't really care. That night, the bath ritual was repeated. The hot water, the footsteps in the hallway, the door opening. This time, Amos spoke more. Words I don't want to repeat, words no girl should hear. I remained motionless, eyes closed, praying it would end soon. When I finally got out of the bath, he was no longer there. I ran to my room, dressing on the way, my heart beating like a drum. The chair against the door, covers pulled to my chin, eyes open in the darkness. That's how the cycle of terror that would dominate the following years began. The nightly baths became a ritual of fear. Amos was always there, watching, commenting, threatening. "I won't stop until you're pregnant," he repeated, like a terrible mantra. "You'll be my little woman. You'll give me children." Gladys recovered from the fever, but something in her had changed. She became more distant, more apathetic. She saw what was happening but closed her eyes, turned her face. Once, I tried to talk to her, to tell about the baths, about Amos's words. She cut me off abruptly. "Don't make things up, girl. He's just taking care of you." School became my only refuge, the hours when I could escape that house. I studied hard, lost myself in books, in lessons, trying to forget, trying to create an alternative world where I didn't need to go back home. It was at school that I met Teacher Olivia, a gray-haired lady with kind eyes who taught English. She noticed my change, how I had become more quiet, more withdrawn. One day she called me after class. "Is everything all right at home, Genevieve?" she asked, her voice gentle. I wanted to tell everything, wanted to scream for help, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear was greater, the fear of not being believed, the fear of making things worse, the fear of Amos finding out. "Yes, teacher," I answered, eyes fixed on the floor. "I just miss my brother." "If you need to talk," she said, lightly touching my shoulder, "I'm here." That gentle touch, that sincere offer of help, almost broke my determination. I almost ran into her arms, almost told everything. But I didn't. At that moment, I couldn't. At night, at home, the ritual continued. The bath, Amos at the door, the words, the fear. Each day, he became bolder, closer, his hands no longer content to just touch my hair. I shrank, tried to cover myself, tried to disappear in the water. And each night, before sleep, I observed my body with growing terror, looking for signs of the pregnancy he promised, of the final prison that would tie me forever to that man, to that house. Each month that passed without that sign was a small miracle, a brief respite, a postponement of the sentence. That's how I lived my 13 years. Between the fear of nightly baths and constant anxiety, watching my body change, develop, knowing that every change was noticed by those small, cold eyes that lurked in the water. The days became weeks, the weeks became months. Each day was like the previous one, each night brought the same terror. I became an expert at predicting Amos's moods, at interpreting his footsteps in the hallway, at knowing when it was better to hide and when it was inevitable to face his presence. The winter of 1965 was particularly harsh. The cutting cold of the Mojave Desert seemed to penetrate through the cracks in the walls, through the worn floorboards. The water for the bath took longer to heat, and I prolonged the process as much as I could, delaying the moment of the nightly ritual. But he always came, inevitable as the night. "You're taking too long," he complained one night, his voice altered by whiskey. "The water will get cold." The bathroom visits became longer, more intense. Amos was no longer content just to watch. His hands, large and rough, began to touch the water, to play with the thin foam. "Soon, soon," he would say, eyes fixed on me. "We'll see if there's a little baby growing in there." I lived in a constant state of alert. I slept little, ate poorly. At school, my grades began to fall. Teacher Olivia called me again, concerned. "Genevieve, you're thinner. You have dark circles. Are you sick?" "No, teacher," I answered, avoiding her gaze. "I'm just not sleeping well." "Why?" she insisted. I hesitated. Something inside me wanted to tell, scream for help, but the fear was greater, the fear of what Amos would do if he knew. "Nightmares," I answered finally. It wasn't a lie. My life had become a nightmare. At home, Gladys was becoming more of a shadow each day. She rarely spoke, rarely left the room except to cook and clean. When Amos wasn't around, she would sit in the kitchen chair, staring at nothing, as if absent from her own body. Sometimes she coughed, a dry cough that painfully reminded me of my mother. One night, while washing the dinner dishes, I heard a conversation between them. They were in the living room, voices low but audible in the small house. "She's already at the age," Amos was saying. "She's a woman now." "She's only 13 years old," Gladys replied, her voice weak but with a rare tone of protest. "At her age, many are already married," he retorted. "Besides, she's not your daughter, nor mine. She's just a girl we're raising out of charity." Those words hit me like a punch. I was nothing to them. Not a daughter, not a stepdaughter, just a girl, a burden, an object. That night, in the bath, Amos was different, more audacious, more determined. His hands were no longer content with just the water. "It's time," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've waited long enough." I closed my eyes tight, tears silently streaming down my face, mixing with the water that now seemed cold, despite the steam still rising. When I finally freed myself from that bathroom, I ran to my room, legs trembling, heart racing. That night, lying in bed with the chair pressed against the door, I made a decision. I couldn't continue like this. I needed to do something, anything. The idea of a pregnancy, of being forever trapped with that man in that house, was unbearable. The next morning, during breakfast, Gladys coughed violently. A thread of blood ran from the corner of her mouth. She quickly cleaned it with the napkin, but I saw the dread in her eyes. She knew what it meant, the same thing that had taken my mother. Amos saw it too. His gaze hardened. "I'll call the doctor," he said dryly, without real concern in his voice. Dr. Baker came that afternoon. An elderly man, with trembling hands and thick glasses. He examined Gladys in the bedroom while Amos and I waited in the living room. When he came out, his countenance was grave. "It's tuberculosis," he said softly to Amos. "Advanced." "How long?" Amos asked, his voice cold. "Hard to say. Months, maybe weeks. She needs to go to a sanatorium." Amos shook his head. "I don't have money for that. She'll stay at home." The doctor sighed, defeated. "Then she needs care, absolute rest, medicine." He wrote a prescription, handed it to Amos. "And you need to be careful. It's contagious." After the doctor left, Amos sat heavily in the kitchen chair. His gaze met mine, and I saw something new there: calculation, planning. "You'll take care of her," he ordered. "Give the medicine, make the food, clean." I nodded in silence. I had no choice. The following weeks were a blur of exhaustion. I woke up early, prepared breakfast for Amos, cared for Gladys, went to school, came back running, prepared lunch that I left ready for when Amos returned from his trips, cleaned the house, washed clothes, gave medicine to Gladys, studied when I could, prepared dinner. At night, the bath ritual continued, but now there was a new dimension of horror. "Don't worry about her disease," Amos would say while watching me in the water. "When she's gone, it'll be just the two of us. You, me, and the child you're going to give me." The idea of being alone in that house with Amos, without even the distant and apathetic presence of Gladys, was terrifying. I began to plan my escape with greater urgency. I started saving coins. A penny here, another there, from the change when I went to buy bread or medicine. I hid them in a hole I made in the mattress. It wasn't much, but it was something. At school, Teacher Olivia continued to observe me with growing concern. One day, after class, she detained me again. "Genevieve," she began, her voice gentle, "I'm very worried about you. You're thinner each day, sadder. I know your stepmother is sick, but is something else happening?" I looked at her, at those kind eyes, and almost collapsed, almost told everything. But fear paralyzed me again. Instead, I asked, voice almost a whisper, "Teacher, how much does a bus ticket to San Diego cost?" She looked at me in surprise. Why do you want to know that? My brother, he's in Riverside. I want to visit him. I understand, she said, thoughtful. It must cost about $20, more or less. It's a long trip. $20. I had saved maybe 5. I would need much more time. Your stepfather can't take you? Asked Olivia. The panic must have shown on my face because she frowned, concerned. Genevieve, if something is wrong, you can tell me. I can help. I shook my head, eyes burning with contained tears. Everything's fine, teacher. Thank you. That night, returning home, I found Gladys sitting in the kitchen, paler than ever. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of fear, regret, and something deeper, sadder. He's out, she said, her voice weak. Coming back only tomorrow. I nodded, feeling a brief relief. A night without the bath ritual, without the eyes, without the hands. Sit down, said Gladys, indicating the chair across from her. I need to talk to you. I sat, apprehensive. Gladys never wanted to talk. I know what he does, she began, eyes fixed on the table. I know what happens in the bathroom. I remained motionless, heart pounding in my chest. Why don't you do anything? I finally asked, voice trembling with contained anger. Why do you allow it? She coughed, a harsh sound that shook her fragile body. At first, I thought it was just looking, that he would never go beyond that. She paused, breathing with difficulty. Later, it became too late. He's a dangerous man, Genevieve. Very dangerous. What do you mean? Her eyes met mine, and I saw terror in them. I think my brother killed your father. The world seemed to stop. What? I whispered. The accident on the railroad. It wasn't an accident. Amos was there that day. He knew the foreman. He wanted to have me for himself, always wanted. But your father was in the way. I felt nausea, stomach churning. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm dying, she answered simply. And because I fear what he'll do to you when I'm no longer here. Help me escape, I begged, holding her cold hands. Give me money for the ticket. I can go to San Diego, find my brother. She shook her head. I don't have money. He controls everything. But... She hesitated, looking around as if fearing the walls had ears. He has money hidden, a lot of money. Where? In the shed office. Behind the tool cabinet, there's a compartment. The key is in his pants pocket, the one he hangs in the room. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Gladys, who had always been so passive, so complicit, now offered me a way out. Why now? I asked. Why are you helping me now? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I don't want another sin on my conscience when I meet God. I have enough already. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned every detail, every movement. When day broke, Gladys was worse. High fever, sheets stained with blood from the night coughing. I cared for her as best I could, gave the medicine the doctor had prescribed. Is Amos coming back today? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Only at night, she replied, eyes half closed from pain and exhaustion. He sent a message through Jerry, the helper, had trouble with the truck. It was my chance. Maybe the only one. I waited until mid-afternoon, when Gladys finally fell asleep under the effect of the medication. I silently entered their room, my heart beating so hard that I feared she might hear even in deep sleep. Amos's pants were hanging behind the door, as always. With trembling fingers, I searched the pockets. Coins, a pocket knife, a dirty handkerchief. and a small key, made of brass. I left the house through the back, crossed the small yard to the shed where the trucks were kept. The smell of diesel oil and rubber was strong. The office was a tiny room in the back, with an old desk covered with papers and a rusty tool cabinet. I moved the cabinet with effort, the metal scraping against the concrete floor. There, as Gladys had said, was a small door, almost imperceptible in the wall. The key fit perfectly. Inside, I found a metal box. I opened it with trembling hands. Bundles of money, more than I had ever seen in my life. Large bills, new, organized in meticulous piles. I took enough for a ticket, maybe a little more. I didn't want to take too much. He would notice immediately. I closed the box, put it back, closed the small door, pushed the cabinet back into place. I hid the money in my underwear, the only place where I knew it would be safe. Back at the house, Gladys was still sleeping. I arranged a small bundle with the essentials: the photo of my mother, the embroidered handkerchief, a change of clothes, Claude's letters. I hid it under the bed. The plan was simple. The next morning, I would say I needed to go to the pharmacy to get more medicine for Gladys. Instead, I would go straight to the bus station. There was a bus to San Diego at 8:30. I would be far away before Amos realized. But plans rarely survive contact with reality. Amos arrived earlier than expected. I heard the noise of the truck in the yard when the sun began to set. The familiar terror settled in my chest. I checked if the money was still well hidden, if the bundle wasn't visible under the bed. He entered like a storm, face red, smelling of whiskey and road. "Where's dinner?" he shouted, throwing his cap on the sofa. "I'll prepare it now," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was taking care of Gladys. She got worse today." "Always an excuse," he muttered, heading to the bedroom. "I'm going to take a shower. When I come out, I want food on the table." The shower. Always the shower. But this time it was different. It was him who was bathing, not me. A small relief in a sea of anxiety. I began to prepare dinner: rice, beans, a bit of meat left over from the day before. My hands were shaking, but I tried to concentrate. Tomorrow I would be far from here. Tomorrow I would start a new life. Amos came out of the shower wearing only pants. He sat at the table, poured himself whiskey in a dirty glass. "Food's coming right up," I said, avoiding looking at him. He took a big gulp of the drink, his small, hard eyes fixed on me. "You know what day it is?" he asked. "Friday," I replied automatically. "No, you dummy. It's the 10th, day to check the money." The blood froze in my veins. The 10th. How had I not remembered? Every 10th he counted the hidden money, noted every cent in a small black notebook. "He'll know," I thought, panic growing. "He'll know I took it." "Finish this food," he ordered, getting up. "I'm going to the shed. I'll be right back." When the door closed behind him, I almost fainted with terror. It was a matter of minutes until he discovered. What would I do? Where would I go? I ran to Gladys's room. She was awake, eyes bright with fever. "He's back," she whispered. "And he went to check the money," I replied, voice trembling. "Gladys, he's going to kill me." She closed her eyes for a moment. "In my nightstand," she said finally. "Bottom drawer. There's a brown bottle. They were for when the pain became unbearable." I opened the drawer with trembling fingers, a small amber glass bottle without a label. Inside, white pills. "What is this?" I asked. "Morphine," she replied. "Strong. The doctor said 2 kill a man." I looked at the bottle, at the pills, at Gladys. Was this it? Was this the only way out? Before I could answer, I heard the front door being opened violently. I hid the bottle in the pocket of my apron, heart pounding in my chest. "Genevieve!" Amos's roar echoed through the small house. I left Gladys's room, closing the door behind me. He was in the living room, face contorted with rage, fists clenched. "Your father was a thief, and you are too," he shouted. "Where's my money?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I tried, my voice betraying my fear. His hand moved so fast that I had no time to dodge. The slap hit my face with force, throwing me against the wall. The pain exploded, hot and sharp. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, approaching. "You were there." "You took my money. Where is it?" Another slap, harder, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't take anything." He grabbed me by the hair, dragging me through the living room. "We'll see if a cold water bath helps you remember." The bathroom, always the bathroom. But this time there was no hot water, no pretense of ritual, just pure brutality. He opened the faucet, filling the tub with cold water. "Take off your clothes," he ordered. "No," I whispered, terrified. His eyes narrowed. "Take off your clothes, or I'll rip them off you." My hands moved slowly to the buttons of the dress. Each movement was agony, each second an eternity. The pill bottle weighed in the pocket of my apron. My only chance. "I need to go to the bathroom," I said suddenly. He laughed, a sound without humor. "How convenient. You'll have to hold it." "Please," I insisted. I'm menstruating. I need to clean up." That made him hesitate. The idea of menstrual blood repulsed him, I knew. It was the only thing that kept him distant on certain days. 5 minutes, he finally granted, and leave the door open. I nodded, heading to the small toilet annexed to the bathroom. The door didn't close completely, but gave some privacy. With trembling hands, I took the bottle from my pocket. 2 pills kill a man, Gladys had said. I crushed 3 between my fingers, reducing them to a fine powder. Where to put it? How to make him take it? The whiskey. He always drank during dinner. If I could return to the kitchen, put it in the drink. "Time's up," Amos's voice thundered. "Come here now." It was too late for the whiskey plan. I kept the powder in the pocket of my apron, heart heavy. What followed was a nightmare of cold water, pain, and humiliation. Amos forced me into the bathtub, keeping me submerged until my lungs burned for air. When he allowed me to emerge, it was only to repeat the same question. "Where's my money?" Finally, exhausted, defeated, I had no choice. "In my room," I whispered between sobs. "Under the mattress." He pulled me by the hair, forcing me to stand. "Let's go get it." Trembling from cold and fear, I wrapped myself in a thin towel. He dragged me down the hallway to my room. He lifted the mattress with one hand, while the other still held my arm with brutal force. There it was, the coins I had gathered over months, not the money I had taken from the hiding place. That was still hidden in my underwear, now wet and lying on the bathroom floor. "This?" he roared. "Is this all? Where's the rest?" "There's no more," I sobbed. "That's all. I saved to buy a present for Gladys." He threw me on the bed with force. "Liar," he hissed. "You dirty liar. You know what happens to thieves in my house." His belt made a hissing sound as it was removed from his pants. I closed my eyes, preparing for what would come next. That's when we heard the noise, a dull thud coming from Gladys's room, followed by a prolonged moan. Amos hesitated, the belt still raised in the air. "What was that?" "She must have fallen," I replied, taking advantage of the distraction. She was very weak today. He cursed softly. "Stay here," he ordered. "We're not done yet." When he left the room, I let myself fall on the bed, exhausted and defeated. The escape had failed. The money would be discovered eventually. There was no way out. That's when I saw, in his hurry, Amos had left the belt. A thick leather belt with a heavy metal buckle, a weapon if used the right way. I got up silently, picked up the belt. The weight was comforting in my hand. I approached the door, listening. Voices came from Gladys's room, Amos scolding, Gladys coughing and moaning. It was my chance, my only chance. Standing at the door of my room, Amos's belt firm between my fingers, I listened to the voices coming from Gladys's room. She was coughing violently, and he was muttering irritably, "Stop that, woman. Can't you see I have more important things to deal with?" My heart was beating so hard, it seemed to want to jump out of my chest. My hands were shaking, but I held the belt with determination. I had no plan beyond that moment. Hit Amos with all the strength I could gather and run. Run where, I didn't know. I just knew I needed to end this that night. I took a deep breath, taking a step toward the hallway. That's when I heard a sound that froze me. The tinkling of glass. Amos had found the pill bottle. "What's this?" I heard him ask. "Morphine? The doctor gave you this?" Gladys's answer was too weak for me to understand. Then Amos's voice again, louder. "You've been hiding this from me? Do you know how much this is worth?" I retreated to the room. If he was discovering the pills, he would soon turn his attention to me again. I wouldn't stand a chance against him in a direct confrontation, even armed with the belt. I looked around, desperate. My small window faced the backyard, the yard, and the shed. It was narrow, but maybe... I dropped the belt on the bed and tried to open the window. It was stuck. Years of moisture had swollen the wood. I forced with all my energy, feeling my nails break against the frame. Finally, with a sharp creak, the window gave way. The cold night air invaded the room. I looked down. It wasn't a big fall, maybe 6 feet to the ground. I could do this. I had to. I went back to get the small bundle I had prepared, hidden under the bed. When I bent to reach it, I heard Amos's heavy steps in the hallway. "That girl is going to pay," he growled, his voice altered by anger and drink. There was no more time. I abandoned the bundle, returned to the window, passed my legs outside. At the moment I launched myself into the yard, I heard the door of my room being opened violently. "Get back here!" Amos's roar cut through the night. I fell on the hard ground, pain exploding in my knees and palms. But fear was stronger than pain. I got up in an impulse and ran toward the shed. If I could hide between the trucks, maybe I had a chance. The shed was dark, only the weak moonlight entering through the cracks in the roof. I slipped between the two trucks, breathing the strong smell of oil and rubber. I heard the house door slam and Amos's voice shouting my name. "Genevieve, you have nowhere to go. Come back now and maybe I'll be merciful." Mercy. The word sounded like a cruel joke. Amos didn't know the meaning of mercy. I crouched in the space between the wall and the older truck, praying that darkness would protect me. Through the cracks in the shed, I saw Amos's silhouette in the yard, his massive figure cut against the light coming from the house. "I know you're there, girl," he called, his voice falsely sweet now. "Don't be foolish. It's cold out there. Come back to the house." House. That place had never been my home. It was my prison, my personal hell. Amos began to approach the shed. He knew. He knew that's where I had run. I had nowhere else to hide. That's when I saw The office door was ajar, the office where the money hideout was. I crawled silently in that direction while I heard Amos's steps approaching the main entrance of the shed. The office was small, cramped. There weren't many places to hide. The desk, the tool cabinet, some boxes stacked in a corner. The boxes. Maybe I could hide behind them. I had barely positioned myself when the light came on. Amos was at the door, a lantern in hand, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and triumph. "Got you," he said, advancing toward me. I retreated to the wall, knowing I was cornered. There was no way out. Amos placed the lantern on the desk, his small, hard eyes fixed on me. "You know what happens to disobedient girls?" he asked, unbuckling the belt he wore. Another belt, not the one I had left in the room. "They need to learn well." Tears blurred my vision. It was the end. I had no way to escape, no way to fight. I closed my eyes, waiting for the first blow. That's when I heard a noise at the office door. Amos turned, surprised. Gladys was there, leaning on the doorframe, paler than ever, her face shiny with feverish sweat. "Leave the girl alone," she said, her voice weak but determined. Amos laughed, a sound without joy. "Go back to bed, woman. This is none of your business." "It is my business," she replied, taking a faltering step into the office. "All of this is my business. I allowed it. I knew and did nothing." "Gladys, go back to the house," Amos ordered, his voice hardening. "You're sick. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," she retorted. In her hand, something glinted in the lantern light. A glass. "Genevieve, come with me." I looked at Amos, at Gladys, at the door. If I ran now, maybe I had a chance. "She's not going anywhere," growled Amos, taking a step toward me. That's when Gladys did something I never imagined. She laughed, a weak laugh, interrupted by coughing, but a laugh. "What's so funny?" Amos asked, irritated. "You," she replied. "So concerned with your money, with your power over us. You didn't even notice what's happening." "What are you talking about, woman?" Gladys raised the glass. "Your drink, the whiskey that was on the kitchen table. You drank it." Amos frowned. "So what?" "The pills," she said simply. "Morphine. Enough to knock down a horse." Amos's face transformed, understanding, disbelief, anger, all in quick succession. "You wouldn't do that," he whispered. "I already did," she replied. "And you know what? I don't regret it. Not one bit." Amos took a step toward her, hands extended like claws. But then he staggered, leaning heavily on the desk. What did you do to me?" "What I should have done a long time ago," replied Gladys. "Genevieve, come. Now." I didn't need another incentive. I ran to Gladys's side, passing as far as possible from Amos, who now leaned on the desk, heavy breathing, red face. You're going to pay," he stammered, his voice already slurred. I'll kill you both." "You won't do anything," Gladys replied with a calmness she had never shown before. "Never again." We left the office, closing the door behind us. I heard a dull thud, Amos falling perhaps. Gladys locked the door with the key that was in the pocket of her robe. "Will he die?" I asked, trembling. "No," she replied, her voice weak. "I didn't put enough for that. But he'll sleep for a good while, long enough." We returned to the house, Gladys leaning heavily on me. Each step seemed to cause her immense pain. When we reached the kitchen, she collapsed in a chair, breathing difficult and noisy. "I need to go to the hospital," she said, between coughing fits. I don't have much time. I'll call for help, I promised. No, she held my arm with surprising strength. First, listen to me. We don't have much time. I sat across from her, still trembling from the night's events. The money, she began. The money you took. Where is it? I hesitated, then confessed. In my underwear, in the bathroom. Go get it, now. I ran to the bathroom, found my clothes still wet on the floor. The money was there, damp but intact. I returned to the kitchen. There's a bus to San Diego at 6 in the morning, said Gladys, each word a visible effort. You'll take it. You'll find your brother. You'll start over. And you? I asked. She smiled sadly. I'll go to the hospital. After that, well, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you'll be far from here. Amos will come after me, I said, the fear returning. He'll find me. No, he won't, she replied with a strange certainty. He'll have too many problems here. What do you mean? She coughed, a thread of blood running from the corner of her mouth. I'll go to the hospital. I'll tell everything, about the abuse, about you, about how he threatened me all these years. I'll tell about my suspicions about your father's death. Will they believe you? I asked, skeptical. Maybe not, but doubt will be planted, and he knows that. He knows that, even on the verge of death, I can destroy his reputation in this town. I understood then. It wasn't just about giving me time to escape. It was about revenge. Gladys's revenge against the brother who had controlled her, manipulated her, using her as a pawn in his cruel plans. There's something else, she continued, opening the drawer of the kitchen table. From there, she took a yellowed envelope. These are letters from your brother, letters that Amos hid from you. I took the envelope with trembling hands. There were at least 10 letters, all with Claude's name and the return address. He wrote, I whispered, tears in my eyes. Many times. Amos intercepted the letters. He didn't want you to know, didn't want you to have hope. I opened the first letter, dated 6 months ago. Claude's familiar handwriting filled my eyes with tears. Dear little sis, it began, I'm worried about you. Why don't you answer my letters? I'm living in San Diego now, working in a mechanic's shop. The address is on the envelope. Please write to me. I need to know if you're okay. San Diego. Claude was in San Diego, no longer in Riverside with our uncle but in the big city, and he had an address, a place to go. Why are you doing this now? I asked Gladys. Why not before? She lowered her eyes. Fear, cowardice, shame. Choose whichever reason you want, all are true. But now I'm dying, Genevieve, and I want to do at least one right thing before I go. The night was long. Gladys told me everything, how Amos had always been obsessed with her, how he had become furious when she married another man, how he had come to my mother's funeral not to console, but to take advantage of the situation, how he had carefully planned to eliminate my father from the path, to take us away, to isolate us where no one knew us. He always wanted a family, she said, her voice increasingly weak. But his way, controlled, submissive. When you reach the age, when he realized he could use you, she didn't need to finish. I understood now. I understood everything. When the sky began to lighten, Gladys was worse. High fever, difficult breathing. I helped her dress, get ready. I'll call Mr. Olson, the neighbor, she said. He has a car. He'll take me to the hospital in Barstow. It's better than the one here. And me? I asked. You'll go to the bus station, the first bus. Don't look back, Genevieve. Just go. We said goodbye at the door of the house, me with my small bundle, now retrieved from under the bed, and Amos's money safe in my pocket. She, leaning on the doorframe, more ghost than person, her face marked by disease and suffering. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her gaunt face. "For everything, for not having protected you." "You're protecting me now," I replied, briefly hugging her. It was the last time I saw her. I headed for the bus station, my heart heavy but determined. I didn't know what would happen to Amos when he woke up, what Gladys would say at the hospital, if anyone would believe her. I only knew I was free, finally free. The bus to San Diego arrived punctually at 6 in the morning. I climbed the steps with trembling legs, handed over the money for the ticket. I sat by the window, watching needles disappear as the bus gained the road. I didn't cry. Tears would come later, many times, in many moments. But at that instant, I felt only an immense relief. The nightmare was over. The cold shower water, Amos's eyes, his hands, his threats, everything was left behind. On the curves of the road, pressing against my chest the envelope with Claude's letters, I allowed myself, for the first time in a long time, to dream of a future without fear, a future that at that moment seemed possible. And as the sun rose on the horizon, bringing light to a new day, I whispered a promise to myself. Never again. Never again will anyone have that power over me. Never again will I allow them to make me feel this way. It was the beginning of my liberation, the beginning of the journey that would lead me, many years later, to become the woman I am today, a survivor, a woman who learned, in the hardest way, the true meaning of strength. The journey to San Diego was long. The bus bumped along the desert highway, stopping in small towns along the way. Sitting by the window, I watched the landscape changing, the open fields giving way to larger cities, more movement, more life. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amos's contorted face, heard his threatening voice. So I opened them again, focusing on the landscape, trying to convince myself that the distance between us grew with each mile traveled. I arrived in San Diego in the late afternoon. The bus station was a chaos of people and noise, so different from the oppressive quietness of Needles. I got off the bus with my few possessions, feeling small and lost in that immensity. In the letters, Claude had provided an address, Ocean View Street, in the Mission Hills neighborhood. I took the money that remained from the ticket, counted it carefully. It wasn't much, but maybe enough for a taxi. Asking about city buses seemed too intimidating at that moment. An elderly taxi driver with a gray mustache and gentle smile agreed to take me. "First time in San Diego?" he asked, observing my frightened look in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I answered, my voice small. "I came to find my brother." "Ah, that's good," he commented. "Family is important. Has your brother lived here long?" "A few months. He works in a mechanic's shop." The taxi cut through the busy streets of the city. I looked in wonder at the tall buildings, the shops, the people hurrying on the sidewalks. Everything was so big, so vibrant, so free. We arrived at the address after about 20 minutes. It was a quiet street with simple but well-kept houses. I paid the taxi driver, thanked him. I stood on the sidewalk, looking at the number indicated in Claude's letters. A light green house with a small porch. In the front yard, colorful flowers. A cheerful, welcoming house. With my heart beating fast, I approached and knocked on the door. Footsteps on the other side, a female voice asking who it was. "I'm looking for Claude Rodriguez," I replied, my voice trembling. "My brother." The door opened, revealing a lady in her 60s, gray hair tied in a bun, kind face marked by time. "Are you Genevieve?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Claude's sister?" I nodded, surprised to be recognized. "My goodness!" she exclaimed, opening her arms. "Come in, girl, come in. Claude will be crazy with joy. He looked for you so much." I entered hesitantly. The house was small but cozy. Photos on the walls, the smell of food in the air, a feeling of home that I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm Mrs. Irene," the lady introduced herself, leading me to the living room. "Claude has lived with me for almost a year. He's like a son to me." How did he end up here?" I asked, sitting on the sofa she indicated. "Oh, it's a long story," she replied, sitting beside me. "But basically, Claude worked for my late husband in the shop. When Harold died, Claude took over the business. He had nowhere to live. I had this house too big just for me. It was a blessing for both of us." She looked at me carefully, noticing my tired appearance, the wrinkled clothes, the fear still present in my eyes. "You don't look well, dear," she commented gently. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. How to explain? How to tell a stranger the horrors I had lived through? "It's complicated," I finally replied. "I ran away. From needles. From my stepfather." Something in her look told me she understood more than I had said. An ancient wisdom, a feminine understanding that transcends words. "You're safe now," she assured, squeezing my hands between hers. "This house is your home for as long as you need. And Claude will be so happy. He never gave up finding you, you know?" The tears I had held back during the entire trip finally came. Thick, hot, liberating. Mrs. Irene hugged me, allowing me to cry on her shoulder, murmuring words of comfort like a mother would. That's how Claude found us when he came home from work, an hour later. I was still sobbing in Mrs. Irene's arms when the door opened and he entered. I didn't recognize him immediately. The skinny boy I knew had transformed into a tall young man, with broad shoulders, hands stained with grease, face marked by hard work. But the eyes were the same, gentle, protective, full of life. "Claude," I called, voice choked. He froze at the door, eyes wide with disbelief. "Jeannie," he whispered, using my childhood nickname. "Is it really you?" I stood up, legs wobbly. We looked at each other for a long moment, years of separation between us, an ocean of unshared experiences. Then, in a sudden movement, he crossed the room and hugged me. A hug so tight it almost took my breath away. But I didn't mind. It was safety. It was protection. It was what I had longed for so long. "You came," he repeated, voice choked. "You finally came." That night was one of tears, stories, revelations. Sitting at Mrs. Irene's kitchen table, over plates of steaming soup and homemade bread, I told everything. Father's death, Amos, the baths, the threats, the constant fear. I told about Gladys, about her illness, about how she had finally helped me escape. Claude listened to everything in silence, fists clenched on the table, his face a mask of pain and contained anger. When I finished, he stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "I'll kill him," he declared, his voice dangerously calm. "I'll go back to Needles and kill him with my bare hands." "No, Claude," I intervened, frightened. "He's not worth it. He's not worth it." "He abused you!" he shouted, punching the wall. "My little sister!" Mrs. Irene, who had listened to everything in supportive silence, finally spoke. "Revenge won't erase what happened, Claude. It will only bring more pain. What your sister needs now is a new beginning. Peace. Security." Her eyes met mine, wise and compassionate. "And justice, of course. But real justice, not revenge." In the following days, a plan was formed. Mrs. Irene knew a lawyer, Ms. Concetta, who worked with cases of violence against women and children. With my permission, she called her to talk. Ms. Concetta was an impressive woman, tall, elegant, with a firm voice and penetrating gaze. She sat with me for hours, listening to my story, taking notes, asking difficult but necessary questions. "We can report him," she explained. "There are laws, even if they aren't always well applied. But I need to be honest. It will be difficult. Your word against his. Without physical evidence, without witnesses willing to speak." "Gladys," I remembered. "She knows everything. She was going to the hospital in Barstow when I ran away." Ms. Concetta nodded, thoughtful. "I'll check. If she's willing to testify, we have a chance." But it wasn't necessary. 3 days after my arrival in San Diego, the local newspaper carried a small note that Claude found by chance. "Man found dead in Needles." Amos Silvera, 45, owner of a small trucking company, was found dead in his office. Police are investigating the circumstances of death, but there are suspicions of suicide. Suicide. The word hung between us like a ghost. Could it be possible? Had Amos, upon waking from sedation and discovering that I had fled, that Gladys had gone to the hospital possibly to report him, decided there was no way out? We never knew for sure. A few weeks later, we received a letter from Barstow. It was from Gladys, dictated to a nurse. Her handwriting was different, but the words were hers. "Genevieve," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well and safe. I've been in the hospital for almost a month. The tuberculosis has advanced a lot. The doctors don't give me much time. You need to know, Amos is dead. They say it was suicide, that he took the morphine pills that were left. Maybe it was. Or maybe he tried to drug himself again, as he sometimes did, and miscalculated the dose. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're free. He'll never hurt you or anyone else again. Before I die, I want you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. For not having been strong enough to protect you before. For having allowed everything to happen. The house in Needles and what remains of his business are being liquidated to pay debts. But there's some money in an account at First National Bank. It's yours. It's not much, but maybe it will help you start over. Live your life fully, Genevieve. Live for both of us. Gladys. The letter came with the bank account information and a power of attorney signed by Gladys, giving me the right to access the money. It wasn't a fortune, but for a 14-year-old girl who had arrived in San Diego with only the clothes on her back, it was a beginning. 2 weeks after receiving the letter, we learned that Gladys had passed away. Claude and I lit a candle for her. A complex woman who had been both accomplice and victim, both oppressor and liberator. In her final moments, she had chosen to do the right thing. That counted for something. Life in San Diego began to take shape. Mrs. Irene insisted that I stay with them. "I have a spare room and enough money," she argued when I tried to protest. "And it would be good to have a young female presence in this house. I'm tired of only talking to mechanics who smell like oil." With Ms. Conchetta's help, we got documents that allowed my enrollment in the local school. I was behind in many subjects, but studied with determination. At night, I helped Mrs. Irene in the kitchen, learning recipes, talking about everything and nothing. Claude worked hard at the shop. Gradually, the clientele grew. He had a natural talent for engines, an honesty that customers valued. He began to give me lessons too. How to change a tire, how to check the oil, small maintenance tasks that every woman should know, he said. I never want you to depend on anyone again, he explained one night while showing me how to use a wrench. I want you to be free. Truly free. Freedom. The word had a sweet taste in the mouth, a musical sound in the ears. After so much time living in fear, freedom was intoxicating. The nightmares came, of course. Nights when I woke up screaming, the ghost of Amos still vivid in memory. Mrs. Irene was always there, a silent and comforting presence, offering tea, a hand to hold, a shoulder to cry on. It will pass, she assured. Not completely, perhaps. Some scars remain forever. But the acute pain, the terror, that passes. She was right. With time, the nightmares became less frequent. The frightened girl who had arrived in San Diego in 1966 began to blossom into a more confident, more secure young woman. Miss Conchetta became a constant presence in our lives. She dined with us at least once a week, brought books for me, discussed interesting cases in language I could understand. "You have a sharp mind," she commented once. "Have you thought about studying law?" The idea planted itself in my mind, growing slowly. Law. Helping other people who had gone through what I went through, giving voice to those who had none. In 1968, 2 years after my arrival in San Diego, another turning point occurred in my life. Mrs. Irene suffered a stroke. It wasn't serious, but left her more fragile, with difficulties making certain movements. Claude and I took turns in her care, him during the day, me at night and on weekends. Between that, school, and helping in the shop when I could, my days were full. But there was a purpose now. There was love. There was family. It was during this period that I met Everett. He was a customer at the shop, a serious young man, a few years older than me, who worked as an accountant at a bank. His car, a 1966 Beetle, constantly had problems that brought him to the shop. "I think he makes up defects just to come here," Claude teased, observing how Everett always appeared during the hours when I was helping at reception. I blushed, denied it. But there was something in his eyes, in the way he treated me, with respect, with patience, without pressure. Something that made me feel safe. Our first date was a coffee at the diner across from the shop. We talked for hours about books, about music, about dreams. I told him about my ambition to study law. He told me about his desire to open his own accounting firm one day. I didn't talk about Amos, about the baths, about the horror of needles. Not yet. Some shadows were too heavy to bring into the light of a first date. More coffees followed, then a movie, a walk in the park. Everett was patient, respectful. He never tried to touch me without permission, never pressured me for more than I was ready to give. When I finally told him my story, months later, sitting by the ocean on a Sunday afternoon, he listened in silence. There was no judgment in his eyes, just a deep sadness and controlled anger. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said finally, holding my hands gently. "No child should go through that. No person should." "I'm afraid," I confessed, "afraid that this has broken me in some way, afraid that I can never be normal." "Normal is overrated," he replied with a small smile. "And you're not broken. You're wounded, yes, scarred, yes, but that only makes you stronger, more real. That day, for the first time since I left Needles, I allowed a man to embrace me completely, without reservations, without fear. A small step, but significant, a step toward healing. Me at 18, Everett at 23. Mrs. Irene more fragile, but still governing her house with a firm hand. Claude now with a partner in the shop, expanding the business. And I, with the help of a scholarship and the money left by Gladys, about to begin law school at San Diego State. Life had taken a direction that I could never have imagined during those nights of terror in Needles. The path hadn't been easy. I still carried scars, still had moments of darkness. But there was light now. So much light. One afternoon, while studying for the entrance exams, I found an old photo among my papers. Claude and me in Riverside, before everything. 2 smiling children, with no idea what the future held. I looked at that girl in the photo, at her innocent eyes, and whispered, "We made it. We survived, and we're building something new and beautiful from the ashes." It was a promise, a commitment, to move forward, to transform pain into purpose, to use my story not as an anchor pulling me down, but as a beacon lighting the way for others who were still lost in darkness. And so, step by step, day by day, I rebuilt my life. Not erasing the past, but incorporating it into a present I chose and a future I designed with my own hands. Free, finally free. Oh, how quickly time passes. It seems like yesterday I arrived in San Diego, a frightened 14-year-old girl. And now, here I am, at 73, sitting on my porch with a view of the ocean, telling stories to you. San Diego truly became my home. Here I built my life, brick by brick. Here I graduated from law school in 1975, married my Everett in 1972, and together we've been for over 50 years. A good man who never failed me, who was always a partner and understanding of my invisible scars. We had 2 wonderful children, Julian, an engineer who lives in Portland, and Martha, an environmental lawyer right here in San Diego. And my 3 grandchildren are the joy of my old age, Benjamin, Lucy, and little Claire, who always asks me why I leave the bathroom door open. Some habits we never lose, even after so many years. My career in law led me to work with women and children victims of violence. In 1985, I founded the Rebirth Support Center, which started as a small room in the back of the office and is now a respected organization in the city. I officially retired in 2015, but never stopped helping. My brother Claude still lives nearby, with his wife Helen and their 3 children. Our family grew, strengthened. Mrs. Irene, that blessed lady who took us in, lived with us until she passed away in 1980. I try to honor her legacy of kindness every day. Now, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I host my friends from the Life Threads group for needlework. Many of them are women I met at Rebirth, who carry stories similar to mine. We stitch and talk, and our pieces are donated to hospitals and shelters. It's our way of transforming pain into beauty. When I look at the ocean at sunset, I think of all the paths that brought me here, the difficult ones, the painful ones, but also those full of light. I think of the terrified girl I was and the woman I became. And I feel a deep peace, not because I forgot, but because I chose, day after day, not to be defined by what was done to me, but by what I chose to do with the life I have. My dears, who have accompanied me this far on this journey of difficult memories to share, I want to leave you with some words born not from books, but from life lived, from falls and new beginnings. If you're going through difficult times now, if you feel the walls closing in around you, if the water in your shower also freezes even when it's hot, know that you're not alone. The world can seem dark when we're in the storm, but there is always a path forward. The greatest prison doesn't always have visible bars. Sometimes it's built of fear, shame, and silence. Each person has their own Amos, their own bathroom without a lock. Whatever your prison, there is a way out. When I fled from needles, I thought I was just escaping. I didn't realize I was walking towards something new. Each step away from the horror was also a step toward healing. Transforming pain into purpose was my salvation. When I began to use my experience to help other victims, my wound became a source of understanding and strength. Scars don't define who we are, but they are part of our story. They are marks of survival. They remind us not only of what we suffered, but mainly of what we overcame. Seek help. In your country, in your city, there are people ready to extend a hand, organizations that offer shelter, counseling, legal assistance. You don't have to face the darkness alone. Shame should never be the victims, but the perpetrators. I carried that shame for so long, until I understood it wasn't mine to carry. And if you know someone going through this, be like Mrs. Irene was for me. A safe harbor, an attentive ear, an extended hand. Sometimes a single gesture of kindness can save an entire life. Today, at 73, I look back and see that the greatest act of courage in my life was believing I deserved better. And you deserve better too. And before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask you who watched until now to leave your like, subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel, and hit the notification bell to receive more stories of overcoming like this one. Each subscription is a virtual hug for this grandma here and helps me continue sharing stories that can give hope to those who need it. And in the comments, leave the word survived. Only those who watched until now will understand. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Life can knock us down, my dears. But the choice to get up is always ours. And it's worth getting up, believe me. It's worth every effort, every tear, every new beginning. Because on the other side